Now we come to the point of speaking about our wonderful honoree. Chris Slattery is what I call a pro-life superhero. In 1985, Chris pursued a dream to support pregnant women and girls in need with real alternatives to abortion by launching Expectant Mother Care, or EMC FrontLine Pregnancy Centers in Midtown Manhattan. In 1990, he went full-time into pro-life work after a 13-year advertising career. EMC was New York City's first independent pro-life pregnancy center and is now in its 38th year as one of the largest and busiest networks of pregnancy help centers in New York City. Chris has made a major commitment to training future frontline lifesavers with a unique international pro-life internship program. He has supervised and trained sidewalk counselors at up to 5 New York City abortion centers at the same time since 2007. In the mid-'80s, Chris pioneered the use of on-site ultrasound and prenatal care in a crisis pregnancy center and introduced 3D and 4D ultrasound in life-saving work when the technology became available. He launched the first mobile ultrasound clinic in a major U.S. city on the streets of the South Bronx, and later in Jackson Heights, Queens. Since the mid-'80s, EMC has offered free pregnancy testing, on-site ultrasounds, pro-life counseling, on-site subsidized prenatal care, STD testing, on-site adoption arrangements, referrals for housing and legal aid, and material assistance like diapers and Amazon goods to over 150,000 pregnant women in crisis. Over the years, over 43,000 girls and women counseled and served by EMC have chosen life instead of abortion. I think it can all be summed up in this memorable anecdote from one of Chris's EMC staff. A 100% abortion-bound woman who was in an abusive relationship made a 100% turnaround at EMC in Brooklyn. Her partner was strongly pressuring her to have an abortion. We sat with her in the living room area in Brooklyn and talked with her at length. She was 10 weeks pregnant, and she had just heard the baby's heartbeat that morning on sonogram. We sent her to another agency who could further assist her. They gave her a lot of support also, and she's currently carrying her baby. She's happy she made the decision for life. She's also a mother to a 3-year-old. When I last spoke to her, she informed me that her baby would have perished had she not initially walked into EMC on that day. She's now going it alone without the partner, but her baby will live. That couldn't have happened without Chris Slattery providing the space and place for this woman to come to. So many lives have been saved as a result of women who sometimes accidentally came to EMC for an abortion. After coming through the door and finding a safe place where they are emotionally and spiritually supported, they change their mind. EMC, founded by Chris Slattery, has tirelessly saved the lives of so many children. It is a true blessing. A native of New York City, Chris lives here in Yonkers with his lovely wife, Eileen, who has worked by his side at EMC since 1986. They are proud parents of 2 daughters and a son. 3 daughters and a son. I stand corrected. Apologize. Please join me in congratulating our first 2-time Westchester Putnam Right to Life honoree in 2010 and 12 years later in 2022, Chris Slattery.
Bless you, Jerry. Thank you. About 3 weeks ago, I was in South Street Seaport with my wife. Our second daughter, Bridget, was inviting us to a tugboat ride. She's a little crazy. For a couple of years, she lived on board the Clearwater sloop on the Hudson River, which was purchased and founded and is a foundational craft of the group started by Pete Seeger. And she's a real sailor, and she's a first mate on a sloop now at the South Street Seaport, plus the tugboat. So after we had our nice little sail around the harbor, and they had an outdoor exhibit of booths, and there was a guy that was selling old ads. And I found this ad. Land of Contrast. It was an ad for the South African Tourist Corporation from the 1950s. And why would that be of interest to me? Well, that's where my parents met, where my mother worked in the 1950s, and where my father met my mother at a party because he was handling the advertising for them. And he probably wrote this ad. Now, he passed in 1986, so I can't ask him. You notice the kind of African safari motif. You know, I've never been on a real safari. The safaris that I've been on with animals are in Disney, Great Adventure, on my reels, on my phone. And I recently got some patch jackets with some African safari patches, and I really love the idea of being on a safari. And I think it goes back to my parents' love for Africa and adventure. My son, Desmond, named after my late dad, John Desmond, returned from an adventure. Last time I saw him, I was in bed in February. And then yesterday, I'm in bed again. And he had, in the meantime, spent the entire interval in Nepal and in Turkey. You see, I come from a family of adventure, a family that is daring, a family in the travel industry. My father was the dean of the travel advertising industry in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. All the countries wanted him to do their advertising, all the airlines. But his big account was British Airways. His father, my grandfather, was in charge of the railroads of London during the Blitz. He evacuated 1 million children during the Blitz on trains. And then in the 50s, opened up British Railways offices all across the United States. And lived on Staten Island. My father was British. My grandparents were British. And they started a beachhead here in New York. And then my father came over after the war. He was in daring intelligence operations. What won the war for us was intelligence. In the World War II, my father was a chief instructor in spycraft, of British special agents who fanned across Europe to sabotage the Germans, the Axis powers, and to round up Nazi war criminals after World War II in Germany, which my father jumped into, after training agents to do the same. I thought I was going to be a lifetime advertising man like my dad, and I started off in that, and I worked for 3 ad agencies, and then I worked for the British news magazine, The Economist, selling mostly travel advertising accounts. So you know I have cancer, and but what you didn't know is that I had cancer when I was 15. I was actually terminal, 15 years old. I had cancer in my lymph glands. I was going to definitely die. A friend of my mother's was pregnant, and she was having a very difficult pregnancy. I was growing up in Newdorp, Staten Island. Newdorp, one of the oldest neighborhoods of Staten Island. She offered up the pain and the suffering of a terrible pregnancy, but she ended up delivering that baby successfully. When I was in the hospital in 1970 in Sloan Kettering, she offered up that pregnancy for me to save my life. Why did she do that? She saved me because God had a special mission for me, and I had no idea what that mission was going to be. It was going to be to save other babies. I had a rough, wild and woolly 4 college years. I was no pro-life activist, I can tell you that. But I was an adventurer. I went off to Europe for a year for my junior year. When I came back and I started my advertising career in Manhattan, I met a Catholic group called Opus Dei, which means the work of God, and I met some practicing Catholics for the first time in my life. I mean, I'd met the average, not serious Catholics in my upbringing, but not at Boston College, not in the 70s. And I began to take my faith seriously. I went to I was invited to a pro-life event. It turns out there were only about 5 of us. In Union Square, Manhattan, in March of 1979. What was it? It was one of these International Women's Days. It was a bunch of bra-burning radical lesbians promoting abortion. Remember, we had at that time legalized abortion, and it was in full swing in 1979. Most of us old-timers well know we legalized abortion in our state 3 years before Roe v. Wade. We had 250,000 abortions in New York City in 1971 and 2. Is that insane? We had the first legal baby killed was on July 1st, 1970. And New Yorkers repealed the abortion law in 1972, except for one vote short of overriding the veto of Governor Rockefeller. We would have overturned our abortion laws. The largest pro-life rally ever held in New York State was in the spring of 1972 in Central Park. 10,000 pro-lifers gathered in Central Park in 1972. Elizabeth Rex raised her hand. She was there. Maybe she was the only one in the room there. We don't have mega rallies in New York State anymore. We are behind enemy lines. When I was spat upon and cursed out behind a police barricade in 1979, and the police kept the pro-aborts from us, and I looked in the faces of these really sick, angry people. I said to my colleagues, one of them who would eventually become a bishop of New York, wow, this is fun. This is fun. About a year and a half later, I was living on East 31st Street, and I didn't realize I was around the corner from the two largest abortion clinics in the East Coast. Eastern Women's Abortion Clinic on East 30th Street and Park Med on 31st and Park. They would eventually merge, and they still operate, but on 2nd Avenue and 42nd Street. I had started practicing my faith, as I said, and then one day in a three-piece suit on the way to one of my ad jobs, somebody called me over. It was 7:30 in the morning. I started going to Mass daily at that time. This was about 1980. And this woman said, "Chris, come over here." I said, "What are you doing out here?" She said, "They're killing babies upstairs." I said, "What?" It's like a 50-story office building. You're kidding me? No. All I can remember was I didn't have any material. I didn't know what to say. But I approached a young mother and daughter, clearly on their way into that abortion clinic. The daughter was only 15. They were black. Her face was almost blanched white with fear. I don't remember what I said to them. All I know is 6 months later, I was holding that mother's baby in my arms in a Brooklyn apartment building in Crown Heights in Brooklyn. And I thought back to that mother that sacrificed for me in her terrible pregnancy. And I began to think, wow. I had gone to my first March for Life that January of 1980. And I've been to almost all the marches for life for the last 42 years. But my friends, the rubber met the road for me on that sidewalk that morning in front of that Park Med abortion mill. And I realized, with only God's grace and daring, you can save a life. What I discovered was there was no place to send this mother. There were no pregnancy centers. This was like well over 10 years into legal baby killing in our state. I'm going, WTF? You've got to be kidding me. I mean, what are we doing? In these years, I discovered, I did my homework, there were 115,000 abortions a year in New York City. I heard about this Dr. Nathanson. I heard about these books he wrote after he left the abortion industry, the abortion papers, and the Aborting America. I got these books, I read these books. He told about how the abortion industry, he started it, and how he abandoned it in 1979, the year I got in. I would meet him. I would become his friend. I would be there when he launched the Eclipse of Reason and the Silent Scream videos. I was there for those big days where he was an amazing speaker, changing hearts, converting so many hearts and souls. How we use these videos later to convert thousands. I could go on all day, and I'll just wrap it up. I've been attacked virtually since I started EMC. In 1987, I was coming back from the March for Life on the Staten Island ferry. I stayed with my wife's cousin on Staten Island that night. He drove. And then on the ferry boat, I opened a paper on like January 23rd. And there's the Attorney General, the President of Planned Parenthood, and NOW with a photo, with a press conference, suing me and my pregnancy center. Since that time, I've had 4 other Attorney Generals try to cripple or shut us down. Besides Robert Abrams, there was Elliot Spitzer, who on just weeks after the 9/11 attacks, hit pregnancy centers with subpoenas to cripple us and shut us down in January of 2002. Then there were attacks by other attorney generals, Eric Schneiderman, that lovely man, who was replaced by Barbara Wood, who did a subpoena of me, and I beat Donald Trump to the New York Attorney General. I had the early record for taking the fifth 200 times before Donald Trump racked it up to 500 times. Actually, thankfully, Donald Trump retargeted the direction of Letitia James away from me. Thank you. And had it not been for Donald Trump, I'm sure that I would be 10 feet under with Letitia James's help. But so the attacks on pregnancy centers have been renewed. The state of New York passed a law signed by the lovely Kathy Hochul, or should I call her just pay to play? The latest in a long line of corrupt Democrat politicians that lead our state. But this new law, by December, will call for an investigation of every pregnancy center in the state, from the tip of Staten Island to the Canadian border to the Buffalo. Every pregnancy center is going to be turned upside down by the Attorney General of New York, eventually, after the Department of Health gets their hands on us. The city of New York is about to launch a public relations campaign against the pregnancy centers of New York City to dismiss and bury us. That was a new law passed by that lovely Mayor Eric Adams and his gang of radical maniacs that run the City Council of New York, who just love pro-life activists and pregnancy centers. And then Joe Biden has gotten into the act too, and there will be a federal investigation of pregnancy centers and a PR campaign launched. So we're getting hit at the city, the state, and the federal level, plus our formerly great leaders at the FBI have now targeted pro-lifers for unprecedented attacks, like the 23 FBI SWAT team agents with guns drawn who arrested a pro-lifer in Philly last week for simply having been acquitted, or actually not acquitted, but for having charges dropped against him for pushing someone who harassed his son in front of an abortion clinic. So even though they offered to turn themselves in for a charge, the FBI chose a SWAT team arrest of this Catholic pro-life leader in Philly. This is what we're coming to. A complete police state at the New York City, state, and our federal level. My friends, we must take back our city of Yonkers, our county of Westchester, Putnam, Rockland, the suburbs, the upper counties, the Long Island. We must take back this state. We must take back this country with you leading the charge. You. I don't know how many years I have left. If God chooses to take me home in the coming years, for those of you that don't precede me, hopefully none, I pass you the torch. Lead pregnancy centers to save babies. Lead 40 Days for Life campaigns. Lead the Face the Truth tours. Lead all efforts to elect pro-life politicians and judges. Thank you to those that have shown up here today. Thank you for those who are serving currently. We're on a safari, my friends. We are in the deep jungle. The animals are generally the pro-abort politicians that have their spears sharpened for the babies of New York, and our goal is to save those babies, to stand as the shields before those spears, to stand up against those that would crush our freedom of speech at the abortion clinics here in Westchester County. There's one man here that stood strong. Please stand up, Mr. O'Neill. Please stand up. Yes, this man stood against the juggernaut of pro-aborts in the Democrat legislature. Thank you, sir. The howling hyenas of the Westchester County legislature, made up of all but one Republican and one conservative, are the spears of the satanic assault on the unborn in our county. We need to take back this county, my friends. Take back Westchester. Keep Putnam pro-life. But never forget, this is a bedroom community of the abortion capital of America, New York City. While I live in Yonkers and I'm a Westchesterite through and through, I know that New York City is the fiercest jungle and battleground. So we may never forget that. While we fight almost a sideline battle in Westchester, the real battle is in New York City. And there aren't as many pro-lifers in New York City as we need. So while I applaud this headline, and I thank God for the day that Roe was overturned, did you ever think you'd see this headline in the New York Times? I'm going to thank you and sign off with this. I ask you to please sign a book. I brought a book of pictures that were collected from a year of my life on Facebook, and it's got a picture of my family on the cover. I would like you to sign this at a table on the way out. Just sign your name. There's not enough time for a nice comment. And I beg for your prayers that God give me as much strength as I need to continue my fight for the coming years, for the days that He's given me. I am not angry at being stricken with cancer again, stage 4, which means it's terminal, my friends. But I was terminal in 1970, and I recovered. I was treated by some great doctors with radiation, thank you, and I'm going back on chemo after my recent surgery last week in the Bronx. But especially to you young people, dedicate your lives to this cause. It's the greatest cause on earth. There's nothing more important than saving lives, supporting mothers and doubtful fathers, giving them the help, the hope, the support. Over the last 2.5 years, we've given out $2.5 million worth of support here in Westchester County through parishes, community centers, our pregnancy centers, and all sorts of organizations. Amazon donated goods, Walmart donated goods, diapers by the tractor trailer load. And believe me when I say we care about the babies and the mothers after the babies are born too. Listen, every married pro-lifer, every married pro-life leader cannot make it with a supportive spouse, and I want to pay tribute to my wife, Eileen. Please stand for being there for me. We're going back to work. After our 4th child was born, she went back to work, and she had a grueling regimen for 21, 22 years of commuting to Queens, New York from Yonkers, and enabled us to raise our children and for me to do the work through hell and high water over these last decades. So, believe it or not, I'm in my 6th decade of work, if you count the 70s, the 80s, the 2000s, the 210s, the 220s. It's been a long road, my friends. But you know what? The most untapped and powerful force we have in the United States is our seniors. So I want to credit the many hardworking gray hairs who I used to make fun of when I was a young 20-year-old. Oh, look at all those gray hairs in the march. Now, actually, we're the minority in the march, thankfully. The March for Life is mostly you young people. But the seniors, you can do a hell of a lot. So whatever your age, just do it. Thank you, my friends.
On behalf of the Westchester Putnam Right to Life Committee, we'd like to present with you our Right to Life Award, beautiful statue, the Virgin Mary with Child. I'd like to invite Kevin Byrne and James Nolan and Amy Sage, who is the Putnam County legislator, by the way, who has talked about voting in opposition to the Reproductive Health Act, and they're going to present something to Chris Slattery as well.
Thank you, Jerry, and congratulations, Chris, on an honor very well deserved.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, right now I serve in the state legislature in the Assembly. I am the last Republican state assemblyman that represents Westchester County, just like James Nolan is the last Republican county legislator in Westchester. But I want you to know that you have fighters in this county and in this region. And Chris knows this probably from many other past functions that we've seen each other at over the years. I'm the ranking member of the Assembly's Health Committee, so when we talk about some of these this awful, hideous bills that come through the state legislature, oftentimes they go through the Health Committee, even when they have nothing to do with protecting our public health. One of them, I'm really glad you said this, Chris, it's not just about before labor and delivery, but we care about life after, including those who are aging in place, including our senior citizens. And I got to tell you, there's a lot of bad ideas up in Albany, and they're running out of them, so they're going to rely on some other old bad ideas. And one of them that we've been able to successfully block in the Assembly for the last 6 years is the assisted suicide bill. So you got to watch out for that, because that, pay attention, because that's on the horizon. So we got to continue to be diligent and fight for life, obviously from conception on, but also for our seniors. Chris, I have a proclamation on behalf of myself and the New York State Assembly to thank you. I'm running unopposed for Putnam County Executive, so I'm very blessed to do that, but that's why I wanted to make sure I brought up our partners from Westchester County, James Nolan, and the chair of the Health Committee in the Putnam County Legislature, Amy Sage, if they have anything to say, but this is on behalf of all of us.
Thank you, and I'll literally go back on the history of fighting against that law that was proposed here in Westchester, which I fought every step of the way. They came into my office and said, we're going to propose this. I looked at it, I said, well, you have no support here. They asked, why not? And they kept pushing and pushing and pushing for months, and it finally got to the point that I said, do you honestly expect the guy whose wife is 5 months pregnant right now to vote for this? Absolutely not. And they replied, well, that can't apply to everybody. I said, well, it is for me. I'm going to make sure to fight you every step of the way. I stood up in front of them, and I also spoke to Ed many times. And I said to Ed, make sure to get the lawyers ready, because you got to go at them. And I continued to fight them. I also told them, and I stood up and I said the first line to them was, the Constitution is a God it will not abandon. And this is breaking the Constitution. And there's nothing in the Constitution that said this is right. The constitutional right that you're also breaking is the freedom of speech. So continue to fight, continue to go forward, and we will make a difference. And I promise you, we're going to be by your side every step of the way.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Amy Sage. Amy is one of our Putnam County legislators. I got to tell you, when we were fighting against that awful Reproductive Health Act, RHA, abortion expansion bill, whatever you want to talk about, whatever you want to call it, when now disgraced ex-Andrew Cuomo, when he decided to light up the Freedom Tower pink and the Tappan Zee Bridge pink, Putnam County stood its ground and passed a resolution opposing the state's disastrous legislation. Amy Sage was a very big part of that. Amy Sage.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Father, for your words. Thank you, Chris, for always standing up for the right thing. I moved here from Nebraska. I married my husband, and he moved me to New York. I'm from Nebraska. The first thing I did when I came here was I volunteered at Birthright in Putnam County. And I sat there and I watched women come in every day, wanting diapers, wanting formula, wanting counsel. And we gave them a place to go. My second daughter took her first steps in the Birthright office in Putnam County. Of course, it's not there anymore. But I've been fighting for life all these years, and it was my great honor to stand up for the right to life by opposing that so-called health bill that they passed in Albany. and I will continue to fight. I want to thank you all so much for the inspiration today. I'm going to go out fighting. I was texting my husband, sending him pictures saying, on fire, on fire. So I want to thank you all for all your inspiration. I'll continue fighting for the right to life.
I think Chris wanted to say a few last remarks. One other thing I wanted to mention, because I never got to actually publicly say this, there's a lot of fighters, the people in this room, some of your legislators and officials. My Aunt Isabel is from Irvington, Milano. She was named the Grand Marshal a few years ago for the Sleepy Hollow St. Patrick's Day Parade. She is unapologetically pro-life. I don't know if you know this, but a lot of those Grand Marshal dinners and things get a lot of politicians show up. Andrea Stewart Cousins tried to show up, and she was told to leave. So you have a lot of champions fighting for you. Chris.
There are two individuals in this room who have sued Westchester County and wish to remain anonymous. But we are looking for additional plaintiffs in the case against the so-called clinic access bill of the county. I have volunteered, along with Ed Riley, to be additional plaintiffs against this law. But we're looking for additional people, young, old, female, male, to join us in this suit. We would prefer you to be public in your suit, not anonymous. The judge might throw out the right to anonymity. It's not guaranteed in the Constitution. This law is outrageous. It's a constitutional violation of our First Amendment rights. If you live in the county of Westchester and you would like to be a co-plaintiff at no cost to you, except being known publicly as a fierce pro-lifer who will stand for the First Amendment and freedom, then approach me later or text me, and I'll give you my number now if you want to take it down. And then I want to ask you for prayers for this other lawsuit. I sued the state of New York for the Boss Bill, which they passed in 2019. The Boss Bill basically created a new protected class of New York citizens who can't be fired for being pro-choice. So let's say your Catholic high school finds out that a teacher is promoting abortion in the classroom. Guess what? They can't fire that person according to this law. Is that incredible? Is that incredible? Would you believe if I had a rogue employee in my pro-life organization who turns pro-choice, I can't fire them? Oh, no way was I going to let that law stand. So I am in federal court for 3 years, moving slowly during the COVID post years. But we're going to win that suit to protect the right of employers to hire freely and not to be forced to create a new, phony, protected, pro-choice class of employees. They'll try anything, even forcing pro-abort employees down our throats. That's how sick these people are. And if we don't fight back with lawsuits, my friends, we will be crushed under. Watch out in New York and California. They are constantly scheming of the most devious, evil laws they could possibly pass and create.